All right. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another great expert roundtable. This should be a really good one. We're going to be talking all about backups, and I think we got a great panel for you guys today that are going to get real deep and dirty into the technical details and kind of understanding the storage and backup market in general. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick things off with a round of introductions so you guys can meet them. Batting first, coming to us from ArcServe. He's been on the show several times before. Excited to have him back, Mr. Christoph Bertrand. Christoph, how's it going today, sir?
It's going really well. Hello, everybody.
All right. Christoph, for those who haven't met you, do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do for ArcServe?
Yeah, so I'm the VP of Product Marketing, which means that I love products and I'm partially a fiction writer. More candidly, I've been in this business for quite a bit of time around disaster recovery, backup, storage, and certainly in multiple segments of the market. So based out of San Francisco, which is a remote location, whereas our company is based out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. And a global business in many countries around the world and with many, many customers and lots of channel partners.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for joining us today, Christoph. Our next panelist comes to us from HPE. You guys may have seen him once or twice before. We're excited to have him back, Mr. George Maestre. George, welcome back, sir. How's it going for you?
Good. So for those who don't know, I went to the Ohio State University, starting middle linebacker today for HPE. We're gonna talk about data protection.
Well, you got the headset on. Actually, it looks like you should be calling the plays instead of actually playing linebacker. You need the green dot on your helmet for that. Well, George, thanks for having. Excited to have you on as well. But really, for those who haven't met you, can you tell us about what you do for HPE?
So I'm the IT strategist, right? So my whole world is to care about technology, right? So I focus mostly on the world of storage today, but that's a growing world, right? That's everything. That's cloud, that's backup recovery, data protection, that's hyper-converged, that's everything.
All right, sounds good, man. All right, well, before we go any further, a couple things we did want to point out. Make sure you check out the resources that both HPE and ArcServe have presented. It's some really good stuff. But most importantly, if you have any questions for our panel, make sure to get that into the Q&A widget. We'll be taking all of your questions on the show today, or at least as many as we can get to. And as a special thank you for hanging out with us today, one of y'all is going to be going home with a Nintendo Switch. So cool prize, and make sure to stick around till the end of the show. And we will be announcing the winner of that at the end of the program. Well, kind of going back into, I had to break up Christoph and George kind of talking beforehand because they were talking about all the good stuff that we wanted them to say to you guys. But maybe to try to kick it up back a little bit, Christoph, let's start with you. Can you talk briefly about how backup and disaster recovery, even though it's been around for a long time, why is it more challenging now than it has been in the past? And how do you feel the industry is responding? Are they doing a good job of it? Are they kind of meeting that need, or is there still a lot of improvement to be made?
Yeah, so I think the answer will depend on how big your business is, right? If we focus on mid-market, SMB mid-market, so and the answer is going to be very different if you're in the largest of enterprises. So a couple of things: data keeps on growing; that's not stopping. That's the only certainty we probably have about the future. There's going to be more data, so that means more data has to be protected, because if you have data, it's going to be valuable to your business. It takes us to the real issue, which is, what do you focus on, and what type of SLAs can you put in place? As you have to do that as you're dealing with IT people or IT journalists. Not everyone in the mid-market can have a backup PhD on staff. It's different in other companies or other organizations that may be larger, but fundamentally, I mean, I look at our business, our VP of IT, he's fixing a laptop 1 minute, deciding on the server strategy for the next, and who knows what else, right? Runs from one thing to another, and of course, when he's not fending off cyber attacks, that's pretty standard. It's not surprising. So what it means is that it places the onus on vendors like us to put together solutions that will not only adjust to the changing environment of where the data is, which is what are the sources, what are the targets from a data protection standpoint. The challenges, like cyber attacks and ransomware, is definitely a big one. And also the simplicity that you need to build into these solutions so that you can really provide the service levels. There's also, finally, to kind of close on this, a misconception, I think, that mid-market companies or smaller companies don't have stringent SLAs. I'm not saying everybody's achieving them, but believe me, you do have them. Anything that's transactional, anything that emails, even, it doesn't matter. The point is you have a lot that hinges on these applications for your business, and being offline for sometimes a few hours can be extremely damaging to your business.
Mm-hmm. George, what do you think? How do you feel like the industry, are they sufficiently responding to the different ways that backup needs are changing?
No. Next question.
You care to elaborate at all?
No. I don't. There's people are complaining about buffer issues, and I'm kind of noticing it as well. Now that said, no, it's not, clearly they're not. I mean, I think everybody's the industry as a whole is doing their best to catch up. But the issues are happening faster than the industry is able to kind of get ahead of it, right? So, and if you look at how this applies to, the whole industry as a whole, right? Whether we think about backup or data protection or whatever it is, everything's happening so quick, right? There's so many more people who are doing so many more things today, and things are just changing and changing and changing rapidly. And the more things change, and the more people who are doing different things, and and when I by different things, I mean, think about like the world you live in today and how much that's changed drastically from the world you lived in just 3 years ago, right? All the different applications you have to manage today, all the different directions your company wants to go in, whether your company is tiny, whether your company is a mid-sized company, whether your company is really big, whatever it is, things are constantly changing. And so the way you address those changes and the way that you back them up, the way that you protect that data, that has to change along with it. And as it's changed, new problems are created. And as those new problems are created, the vendors have to create products to catch up to that, or create, basically different methodologies to kind of fix those things. They're not doing it fast enough.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's start with one in particular, which is the cloud. This is something that a lot of backup vendors are really trying to promote, as far as being kind of the key, like a key component that pretty much all organizations should be considering or incorporating into their backup strategy. George, we'll start with you again. I mean, how fair is that assessment? Do you feel like all organizations really should be considering the cloud? Is it something that is still kind of depends on your use case? Is it as good as kind of the marketers are trying to make it out to be as far as a backup solution?
It is like, so, Christoph is here. It's like ArcServe is doing a great job. I mean, you go to their website today and see all the different things that they're doing. They're doing a fantastic job, and they're not alone. They have some competitors that are doing some really good things as well. The issue isn't, and by my previous answer, if it sounds like I was bashing vendors, you guys know, I cannot give a rat's ass about bashing a vendor, but the reality is that's not my point, right? I mean, it's the way things are changing so rapidly. I mean, you only have so much time to catch up, right? And so for the most part, I think when you consider the time, because so I gotta kind of maybe elaborate on this a little bit. So Christoph's previous answer, we talked about all the problems and the things that you have to, the considerations and everything that happens, and talked about how the size of your infrastructure, who manages it, how much your data changes, how much data you have, and all those considerations. So think about that for a second. How much data you have is constantly changing, and you have a small amount of time to get those things resolved, right? To get all your initiatives resolved. So time now becomes one of the factors. So it's not just how much data you have. It's not just who's managing it, but it's also how much time do you have to fix this problem. So time becomes a major factor. So now if we understand that and we take time as a factor and we say, okay, time, we got to consider the time, right? Now think about the question that you asked. How are we responding to the issues we have getting back up to the cloud, or how are vendors giving us that? In the amount of time that they've had to address that issue, they're doing a great job. Right? Now, are they resolving the issues? No, right? We have lots of problems getting back up to the cloud, right? Every vendor in the world will tell you it's simple as pie, but it's only simple as pie under these circumstances, right? Whatever those circumstances might be. Now, that said, in the amount of time we've had to address this issue, see, we've been talking about cloud for years. We've been addressing cloud for months, right? And people don't seem to think about that because we've been talking about cloud forever. But those previous conversations was, hey, you want cloud? Okay, come buy all my crap, all my big hardware crap, and we'll create a cloud for you. Right? That's what everybody was doing. And that's nonsense. Now, in the real cloud, the real world of public cloud, where people are actually doing more of a hybrid approach, where you have some data on-prem, some data in the cloud, that's just months. We've been dealing with that for months, right? And so you look at that and say, well, how much time have these vendors had to get us there and to kind of get us to overcome the hurdles? They haven't had that much time. So for the amount of time we've had for what's out there, it's brilliant. But no, I mean, we still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Christoph, how far do you feel like, cloud offerings have come? And do you feel like it is easy for most people to get into the cloud, or does it really depend on like how much data and, how fast you need that recovered and that kind of stuff?
Well, of course, vendors are going to tell you it's easy.
Right.
But I think that's not quite the case. There's nothing easy or simple if you don't, think ahead. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the space that we're in, which is the disaster recovery part of it. There are two things. First of all, when you look at data, it's the source. Where is it? Is it already in the cloud, for example? 365, SharePoint, etc. And where do you need to protect it? What is the destination? Now, in many ways, it makes little sense to go protect on-premise an application you're running in the cloud. You're probably going to be doing it cloud to cloud. So how do you do this reliably, where you can literally mask the complexity and merge that the application into it will be essentially a hybrid environment where you may have some stuff on premise and some stuff in the cloud. That's number one. The other is it may be very valid to go do a backup directly to the cloud without having anything on premise. Now, in many use cases, I would not advise it, but there are cases where it makes perfect sense. Some of the challenges will center around bandwidth and availability of bandwidth. If you have a lot of bandwidth, it's very easy to go, back up and even recover or run virtual machines from the cloud. When you don't have all of that bandwidth, and again, there are a number of geographic, parts or to this answer. If I look at it globally, there are geos where bandwidth is not the most reliable thing in the world. Here we're lucky. We have a lot more, but it can get disrupted very easily. You can think of any climate event, for example, or any issue with any attack on the backbones or anything like that. Anything could happen. So if you rely too much on bandwidth, and that's your only linchpin to where your data is in terms of backup and recovery, you take some level of risk. So the answer is hybrid. It's going to be a blend. I think we'll see some customers going with moving more and more of their backups to a public cloud or a private cloud or a managed service provider type of cloud. Or, we have actually, as a company, because we believe that is absolutely critical, and that's what our customers also have asked us to do. We've recently acquired a technology that we've rolled under, and we're integrating into our platform and our portfolio. It's actually going really well and really quickly, where we can back up data direct to cloud, and it's perfect for decentralized enterprises where, okay, you may have a big data center or a couple of locations where you're likely going to have an appliance, a backup appliance, local backups. You're going to recover from those should anything come up. And you're probably going to send those backups to another location, probably in the cloud or a secondary location of yours where you want to have your DR site. But what about all of those offices, those remote environments where you may not have IT personnel, you may not want to have any equipment, or you want to minimize equipment? These are the type of case we're looking at. So very blended, very hybrid. So it's a combination of looking at the targets. Who are you, or where are you sending that backup data? And, it was funny that Jordan talked about time. I look at time as, well, that's the one thing we can't really do much about, and it's hard to control. And in backup and recovery, it's really recovery time objective that I think is key. When I was talking, about impact earlier, you want to get back, on your feet as quickly as you can. And then the other dimension to that is you don't want to do that with yesterday's data, right? So time is really the ultimate driver of SLAs Not so much again in the adoption of technologies as a vendor, but it's just in using the solutions that you provide. How performant are your solutions to get your data back? So that's how I look at time. So slightly different answer, but I would also concur and agree that it's there's always something new, and vendors have to adapt and adjust and add capabilities and support new environments, and it's always going to be a challenge.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get to some of the questions already because they tie into what you were just mentioning. Hambone was asking, if you have a company that has locations in multiple countries, can they have their data stored in the region that the physical location is stored in? Christoph, maybe you can kind of talk about what's on the back end of cloud backup storage and how much control or customization the customers that you work with would be able to have in things like this.
Right. So there are a few things at play here. Number one, obviously, distance from the source to the destination will impact, and the bandwidth will impact, the viability of your backups and your recovery efforts. So that there's kind of that sort of physical dimension to it. But really, what you're talking about multiple countries or geographies, what you're dealing with here is layers of compliance. So you may not be in a position to actually have backup data in another country, or for example, the European Union, or there may be some specific compliance requirements that make it either difficult or impossible or something you need to go manage. So there's a compliance dimension to this answer, and that's really where I would first start. Now, there's plenty of availability in terms of, the big public cloud vendors are everywhere, so it's convenient. You can work with private cloud vendors as well. You can create your own cloud or multiple instantiations of that. So I think where it comes down to is, do you have a tool or a set of tools that allow you to choose and change and mix and match, right? But for sure, this is primarily a compliance question.
George, I wanted to ask you, HPE, you guys partner with pretty much everybody. You guys have your own internal backup solution with StoreOnce, but you guys also do partner with everyone from ArcServe to Veeam. If someone were to ask you, what should I be looking for in my backup solution? What, is there a difference between all these vendors, and what are the questions people should be asking?
Oh, you're hilarious. Well, I mean, by ArcServe, obviously. I mean, duh. I mean, come on, man. How you can put me on a spot like that? So, all right. So, from an HPE perspective, we're agnostic. Like, StoreOnce is technically agnostic, right? So, one of the things that we've done ourselves, which I think was one of the smartest things we've done, was kind of kill off. We didn't kill it off, but we sort of eliminated any loyalties to our own backup software, which would be Data Protector, right? So what we do is we said, look, we take this hardware, because hardware matters, right? So we take this hardware and we say, let's make it open so that we can support an ArcServe or a Commvault or a Veeam or whoever else, and apply it on top, so that this way the customer has as much control over the data as possible, right? And as much control over the decisions as possible. They can just use our hardware from it. So strictly from a backup perspective, we've taken a very agnostic perspective and said, look, these guys are all great, and we partner with all of them, and our appliance will work with them. So what I would say to answer your question, they are all good in their own way, right? And I'm not just saying this because Christoph is on, but I agreed with him privately on this. ArcServe is probably a little bit ahead of the pack, right? For the full breadth of customers that are out there, from a small, guys who have, a 6-person shop to guys who have a 6,000-person shop, right? Whereas, you got guys like Commvault who probably should come in a little bit, who come in second, probably in my opinion, on that list, but they're mostly isolated sort of at the larger company spectrum. And then you've got Veeam that's sort of a little bit all over the place. They do a little bit of everything, and everything they do very well, but they don't necessarily have the full depth of portfolio that customers might need intuitively in the way that you would see some of the other vendors. So these guys are all great, and they're all doing something well. Generically speaking, if I was going to pick what I wanted from my solution, the number one factor would be simplicity. This goes back to Christoph's point, right? About, I don't know who's doing my backups anymore. I don't know, what's going to happen with that. I need to be able to manage this from my iPhone. So simplicity would be number one. Number two, I would say some methodology of predictive. And I know that that's an HPE talking point, and I'm not trying to, you guys all know me. I'm not doing that. But the idea of AI and predictive is actually something that's coming up more and more. And you want to be able to back up data that you might not even know about, or you might forget, or you might be able to see it. You also want to restore data when you possibly can. And you'd like to do that without touch points. You'd like to have that happen with you not necessarily having to sit at the controls. So that'd probably be something I'd look at. Whoever's sort of leading the way there, who's talking to me about their roadmap that's going there, I probably would like that as well. The other thing is you want to have, you really want to have somebody who's flexible enough to handle your changes, because you might have a really predictable data protection sort of / backup methodology, or maybe every night you're backing up 100 gigs, whatever the number is, right? Your porn stash is like 20 gigs and you're backing that up every night. And then one night, all of a sudden you decide you go overboard, and now they went from 20 to 50. You want to have a backup methodology that can accommodate that for you, right? So those spikes matter, right? So you want to make sure that's possible. So flexibility becomes important. And then, of course, something that actually works, right? So you want to go back and check stuff, make sure it doesn't break. You want to test it, make sure the thing doesn't leave you hanging. Cloud is critical, because whether we like it or not, everybody's got to have some type of cloud plan. I mean, period, right? Like it or not, right? Even the guys who are small, you have got to have some type of plan that gets you to the cloud. So you got to manage your infrastructure. I know everybody that comes here, all the Spiceworks brothers and sisters, we're constantly hustling to keep our businesses afloat. And there's very little time to make sure we can get our shit to the cloud. But guess what? We're going to need to get our stuff to the cloud. Like at some point, it's going to happen. So your next backup solution, or your backup solution, what you're looking at, it's got to have some type of cloud integration. Either they're already there, or the next firmware upgrade gets you there, or whatever it is. If not, you got to check out. So I would say those are the things I would care about, right? Simplicity, some type of predictive, flexibility to be able to accommodate, fluctuations in my backup size easily and quickly, and then cloud. I think those would, there's probably Christoph will probably come up with 5 or 6 things I forgot, but I would say those are the top 4, right?
Christoph, what do you think? Anything to add to that? What do you feel like are the things that people really should be looking for when it comes to a backup vendor?
So I think it's a very, very good question that every vendor will try to answer by focusing on what they do really well. So I'm going to try to be agnostic in my answer, knowing that I feel obviously we do really well in a number of areas, but I'll just go back to the first point. Depends who you are, okay? If you're a big, large enterprise, I mean, some company names were mentioned earlier, or the vendors, I mean, you're going to have a solution that meets those requirements from a technology standpoint, just supporting certain environments, certain operating systems, scale, etc. Okay, I would say the second point for me is really, do you know what your problem is? Okay, that sounds silly what I'm going to say, but it's not. Most people don't know what their problem is, especially when it comes to disaster recovery. There's certainly a strong sense that you want to be protected against attacks and get back on your feet quickly, but you don't really know what's working or not working. So I would say the one piece that's important is any solution you buy has to have very robust reporting and a robust level of automation for disaster recovery testing, which is a point that George was making earlier. And that's very, very critical because if you don't have this ability to go test, you can't really figure out what your actual numbers are. So I look at our solution. The one thing we did a couple of releases ago, we introduced a very cool report that's, allows you to enter your recovery point objective. And also it does what we call a short recovery, which goes back and stands up a virtual machine and checks how quickly it goes, et cetera, to get back on its feet. So it gives you a recovery point actual, or recovery time actual number. And that's really great because that's something you can then go use as an IT professional to go say, look, this is where we're at. We can now audit this, we can track this, and we can get better at what we do. And then based on that, you can go get more funding. So the backup and recovery solution has to be very strong in those 2 areas. Then the third one is flexibility, which is a multiple dimensional type of answer where it has to be very, very cloud friendly, no doubt. It certainly has to support a number of environments and be very wide. I mean, in the mid-market, we care about Linux, we care about Windows. We don't care that much about Unix, okay, very candidly. So these are the type of things you really want to focus on. And then I think, yeah, ultimately simplicity kind of becomes the unifier. And that's why we picked that name, Unified Data Protection, for our brand and portfolio. And what we're doing is we're adding more components to it. So think of it as this like SLA dial where you can say, look, there's a new node that shows up. Oh, it looks like it's a VM machine. Oh, what does it run? Oh, it runs something that's very important to me. I'm going to apply my bronze or my silver or whatever protection status, and it's going to get replicated to the cloud every hour or 2 hours or 15 minutes or whatever. So, and it should also know, that engine should also know not only what it is, but what type of backup to apply and what type of destination, etc., based on some rules you can input. But again, it has to be like, I'm not going to say like using an iPhone, because that may be a bit too simplistic, but it has to be easy to use. So there's a lot of investment in our R&D that's going in this direction as we add and bolt on more and more capability. I think we're done with the one single engine silos. We can't afford that. Nobody can afford it. And you have to kind of walk away from that and really look for that more pervasive and hybrid solution.
Okay. Christoph, I wanted to keep talking about one of the things you mentioned earlier, which is ransomware. Can you talk about how much of a risk this is if you have cloud backup, and what are you guys at ArcServe doing to kind of stay proactive against ransomware attacks?
Yeah, so multiple layers. So the first thing is we actually created a consortium called, you can go check it out, with security expert, ransomwarewatch.com. And because here's the deal, we're data protection, disaster recovery specialists. Of course, security matters to us, and we have built in lots of security capabilities and features and built into our solution. But when it comes to handling ransomware and being able to stop it in its tracks, you really are looking at a specialized solution. So work with a specialist, and there are so many other dimensions to it. Ransomware is a very, very difficult phenomenon for everybody. It is becoming smarter and smarter, more and more targeted, and ultimately, the only way out of it, if you have an infection, luckily you can stop it. You are going to be in what I would call the logical disaster recovery situation. Your data has been affected. It doesn't matter what affects it. It could be corruption from a database, an OS, or whatever. But if your data is no good, your applications are not running, you're out of business. It's that simple. So that's where disaster recovery and backup and recovery comes in. The second piece is, so you have to be really strong and educate your people, make sure you have the right security solutions in place. There's a lot of FUD going on right now, a lot of, I can sense that you're getting attacked, so we're going to do something. Well, that's all very nice, but remember, the minute ransomware is executed, it's already too late. I mean, hopefully you can stop it, but you've got some serious things to go do. Secondly, mostly if I look at our cloud environment, we have a disaster recovery as a service option. That's a direct to cloud solution. So we have our own data centers. And the good news is that typically the cloud vendors that provide the hosting for the backup and recovery data have very, very different levels of security than maybe a mid-market organization would have. Not that many of you guys don't do a good job, but the reality is you're looking at hyperscale type of data centers where we're looking at defense style security and physical as well. I mean, literally video surveillance, everything, the whole deal. So ransomware will not it will not be the same type of attack, is what I'm saying. What attacks you will not attack that data center the same way. And there are some best practices, multiple copies, multiple locations. There's that whole 3-2-1 rule. I think it could be multiplied. And these are very important points. And finally, there is a chance that if you do not follow best practices, you could go get your backup themselves could get targeted. It's actually happened. Another vendor had that happen to them, I believe, recently. Or you just don't pay attention. I mean, you have this new guy. Let me go check my webmail on the backup server, okay, and click on that link. Don't think it doesn't happen. I know it happens because we know it's happened. Well, not much I can do if you're going to do that, okay. And finally, don't fall for the FUD that says because you're running this OS versus that OS for the backup, you're not going to get infected by ransomware. It's an equal opportunity offender. If you're running, Windows or Linux, you're going to get affected, or you have that potential. So really, this is something that I cannot emphasize enough. Here's the good news about ransomware, and I'll close with that. It's very likely going to happen. The people who have the money in the business and run the business have heard about it. They're probably very scared about it. And that gives you a very good conversation point to talk about the backup and recovery strategy and infrastructure.
George, what about you? As far as ransomware, what can you talk about how HP, from a storage and backup perspective, is trying to stay proactive against it?
So some of the people were asking about what I did at Spiceworks. So this is what we talked about a little bit at Spiceworks, right? So from a security perspective, I mean, we view this, ransomware is one of those things that's hard to get ahead of. It's hard to get ahead of, right? So the first thing obviously is you got to have that plan, right? So we actually talk about it. We do have obviously have certain things built into a lot of what we do. Like if you think about what we do from an ILO perspective or OneView perspective that has all these security checks, and we check everything that your system has as well. It's interesting because ransomware is probably the top growing threat of all time, right? Of our current time, but probably the most serious one of all time. The issue is how you stay ahead of it is you have to be completely proactive, right? So, and these are the things that people just don't do. So obviously from our perspective, we're constantly working all these different checks and updates, and it really becomes incumbent upon the end user to make sure they're up to date. They have all of the latest, they have the latest firmware. They have everything up to date. They want to make sure that you're completely protected going all the way through. And that also means actually from on-prem perspective, right? Your actual physical security has to be up to date. So we talked about this a lot at Spiceworks. I mean, it really comes down to, we can only stay so far ahead, because as we speak, there's a group of hackers sitting somewhere. Some of them are chatting right now in this window, talking about I'm not convinced Kyle's not a hacker. So there's people here who are actually chatting, and they're plotting. I know they're plotting. I can tell by the way they're chatting. And their hackers are coming up with the next generation code, the next generation of ransomware. And so this is one of the unfortunate things when it comes to security is you're always responding. It's very difficult to stay proactive. You're always responding to the latest, greatest threats that are out there, because as soon as we create these fences and these defenses that kind of protect your perimeter, somebody creates something new that gets through that. And so we have to go back in. So the number one thing that we can do is constantly stay ahead this is where having a really large customer base helps, because all of the data that we collect, we get to apply to everything. So we get to take a look at all the latest malware, ransomware, wherever's coming out. We get to incorporate that into what we do, and we get to publish that out. The other thing is we get to constantly keep putting these best practices out there, right? Stay up to date, keep making sure you have the latest, greatest patches. Everything is up to date. You're doing everything the right way. Keeping your OSs up to date, keeping everything. Then we kind of bombard everybody with that information.
All right, cool. Christoph, we'll go back to you. We got a lot of people. There's a couple questions in chat. Folks were asking about backing up machines and data that's already in the cloud. Is there a different approach to that than backing up data that's on premises? And how much? I mean, if these SaaS and IaaS vendors are already kind of promising this uptime, is it still as important as it is for on premises?
So yeah, there's a lot more that meets the eye. Let's put it this way. Don't assume that your in the cloud application is getting backed up in a way that's compliant with your requirements, or that is getting backed up at all. So that's one of the biggest misconceptions. So what we have, there are a couple of dimensions. The big one, if I look at the big rocks, right, especially some of the spice heads here on the call, you're going to worry a lot about email. Very likely 365, could be other platforms. And there are two things you care about for email. One of them is traditional backup, because you need to be able to have that, whether you're deciding to recover that somewhere else on premise or somewhere in some other cloud. And the second piece is compliance. So it's a little beyond BCDR, but it's not that far off. You don't use exactly the same engines to do that. You have to index everything, and you have to keep it and make sure it's immutable, etc. So it doesn't serve the same purpose necessarily. But those are two of the big things that I think come up with what is probably the most used application online or in the cloud, which is email. So it is different from that standpoint. And also, again, I go back to what I was saying earlier. If you're running the application in the cloud to begin with, or through a service, so it's an as a service, it's probably because you don't want to have that data on premise, right? I'm not saying it's a bad thing, it's just what it is. So you also have to think about what is then going to be the destination for the backup. And again, do these applications have the right type of processes to protect themselves? As I said, there's a lot more that meets the eye, and but I think the email components of it for sure are well covered by many vendors. But again, go look at the level of granularity you need. Can you protect your 365, your Exchange environment, your SharePoint online, etc. These are the type of things that matter.
Okay, George, do you have any thoughts on this? Backing up data that's already in the cloud, is there any difference in approach to that?
I mean, there is, right? I mean, so your cloud provider might have a methodology to back it up for you, right? Again, depending on what level you are and what you're paying for and who you're dealing with. Of course, if it's Amazon, it's probably crashing as we speak, but it's there. Right, it could be kids getting hacked or something. But they have it, right? They got it. It's there. I actually kind of feel like, so one of the things that I see all the time, and people ask me this all the time, a very common question is, what is the cloud good for if not for backup? And so it kind of puts a different spin on what your question is. Essentially, isn't the cloud the actual backup, or aren't we people backing up to the cloud? And I kind of answer that question this way, right? It should be a copy of your backup. If you're going back up to cloud, that's one way, right, of protecting your data. You've got to figure out another way, right? I mean, whether it's tape. I think somebody asked a question before, and I'm going to kind of steal this, but you can back up to tape. It's cheap, it's effective, it's efficient. You can, there's other ways to back up your data. Backup to cloud to me is one strategy, and what it offers, as far as I'm concerned, it offers two things that are important: convenience and convenience of restoration, if not speed of restoration, right? I mean, obviously, if you have an on-prem appliance backing up at massive speeds, you're probably going to get your restoration much faster, right? But generally speaking, convenience of restoration actually cuts a lot of time in half. People don't think of it that way. If I go to the cloud, I can restore my data fairly quickly. So you back up to cloud makes a lot of sense. But how about making sure I have a backup of my backup? Because like it or not, folks, that's the world we live in. So I look at it as my backup to cloud is sort of my first backup strategy. And then whatever my second backup strategy is, I got to make sure I have it. It doesn't matter what more or less it is per se, but I got to make sure I have it. Like one of the things about ArcServe, for example, we can integrate with ArcServe and take snapshots and have those snapshots backed up quickly. You know what I mean? We could do that with other vendors as well, right? Quickly and easily. And that can become your second, and that's lightweight, right? Not a lot of capacity, not a lot of overhead. So you can have that lightweight backup there. And then you also have that backup to cloud as sort of your primary. So that's kind of how I look at it. If you want to, data's already in the cloud, it should have kind of already been backed up when it got there, before it got there. And if it isn't, then you got to figure out how you can get it backed up. Usually your cloud providers, they usually have a mechanism for doing that. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this, I know there's a lot of software vendors out there that do that as well.
But George, we got a question from Tom9055. Hoping you can provide some insight. He's asking about Amazon Glacier.
Hugging?
And
he wants to hug.
Well, that too. But wondering, can you talk a little bit about what's behind, what do you know about this technology? Do you see other cloud vendors going to this type of like high latency, slow to restore type storage for cheaper? And how are they able to make it, what's the difference in the technology that allows them to offer it at a cheaper rate than kind of traditional cloud storage?
Well, it's cost, right? So it comes down, like anything else, comes down to cost. And it becomes an alternative for someone who can tolerate the latency. So you can tolerate the speed, because the backup speed. All right, believe it or not, this question for me is more theoretical and more. You kind of almost have to take a step back a little bit. Backup isn't about backup; it's about restore, right? I look at backup kind of like having dinner with your mother-in-law. No one really wants to do it, but you know it's important. So it's kind of like what backup is, right? So you got to sit down and think about it. What you care about isn't actually backing your data up. What you care about. Tell Chelsea to stop posting content on George. Sorry, that was just called right there. What you care about is how quickly you can restore it. So those cheaper alternatives, they work to get your data backed up. But how effective is that when you need to restore your data? Because the same speed that you backed it up is the same speed you're going to restore it at, or actually might even take longer, right? Depending on the methodology, depending on everything that's in the way. So now if I got to restore this data, if I have an outage, what's my tolerance? What's my pain threshold for this, right? How much downtime can I absorb, right? So that's kind of, these technologies exist to satisfy a market that needs to check backup off their list at a low cost, right? Simple, hey, I'm backed up, I'm compliant, whatever that is, right? I'm good. I can check this box. I didn't spend a lot of money. I'm happy. But things break, shit hits the fan, and now you have to restore at pencil speeds. You know that you're not even at pen speed. Forget about typewriter speed. Forget about computer speed. You're at pencil speed. You're dead, right? So you really have to have those considerations before you go this way, just because of the cost benefits that are there.
Mm-hmm. Christoph, are you guys seeing this in the market at all as far as demand for low cost storage with slow restore times?
Well, it goes back to the conversation about SLAs. Yeah, of course. And on premise, you can do that really well with tape. It's actually a very good medium. And actually, I know a vendor, somebody might be representing here, that has very good solutions that we do a lot of work with. And I'm not, advocating that's the most the best solution for everything. It is a solution, and actually a very successful one, and it's been for many years, and it's super reliable too. Great cost profile. Now, if you look at the cloud piece of it, it's like everything else is. It's about tiered costs. So you really have to weigh the trade-off on this, because if I look at it closely, if your restore speed doesn't matter, why is that? Okay. And do you really even need that? And if you don't need to restore quickly, it's kind of suspicious to me. There's something wrong with that. Not that it's really wrong. I understand you want to optimize cost. It's probably because you have data you have to keep for compliance reasons, and it's very unlikely you restore. And I would agree with a strategy that says, I'm going to put this maybe on a second tier or third tier type of storage, even in the cloud, where if I really had to, it'd be painful, but my probability is very low. I think the danger is what George was saying, the checkbox. Oh, I've done it. Oh, and I've done it at a great price. Yeah, but at what cost? Don't confuse cost and price and trade-offs, right? And I think that's when, when it hits the fan is when you really know what you're doing, what you've done. So that's why having this tiering of applications and data sets associated with those applications that really matter to you should dictate how you back up, and more importantly, what you expect from the restore and what others expect from the restore. The other point I want to make, and we talked a lot about cloud, about disasters, about restoring. Who's doing the restore? What are the circumstances? I mean, if it's ransomware, it's middle of the week, everybody's at work, that's great. You probably have your team with you, or a few friends you can call. If it's on a weekend, different story. If it's when there is a disruption that's regional, and we've seen a few, Florida, Texas, Northern California, just down the road here. Well, nobody's going to be at work. You're not restoring anything. So you get to the next level of conversation, which is the higher availability. So there are vendors who talk a lot about high availability, and I mean, you have to be careful what you say, but you can achieve high availability even if you're a mid-market company. There are great solutions out there where you can fail over or get close to that fail over scenario, where by virtue of having a very low recovery point objective, meaning your data, you haven't lost a lot of data when you had to fail over, and being able to get back on your feet as quickly as 5 minutes. By the way, that's the RTO I know we can achieve, because that's how quickly we can spin up a VM, right? And the associated data set. That's almost like you've avoided the problem, right? It's almost disaster recovery becomes disaster avoidance. That has a cost. That's going to have to be more than that yearly backup that you have to store for a few years, but you'll never recover very likely. So again, don't think that because you're backing up for cheap, you're going to restore like a champ. It's very, very unlikely.
Christoph, I wanted to ask you, we got a question from Berto007, and we're curious how you handle customers that have really low bandwidth. Berto was saying he's got about 20 megabytes of bandwidth. What do you typically do when a customer wants to work with you guys but has low bandwidth?
Yeah, so if it's for the cloud, the service, the backup as a service, obviously we have some specialists. We have a great support team. So when you contract with us, we'll get on the phone and we'll essentially walk you through everything, make sure you've got the right, you've really figured out what nodes you want to protect and how, and then look at specifically bandwidth and try to see if there are ways we can optimize that. We've optimized the transfer, the replication piece of it, if you will, for that solution. The other thing we do for our more traditional on-premise and appliance solution, where you would go from disk to disk and then off to cloud or to another disk, we have two things at play. One of them is the fact that we do global source-side deduplication, number one. And number two, we have incremental forever block level backup. So these two things, after your initial backup, which is where the pain will be in most cases, or your initial replication off site, then you're only sending incrementals. And even better, if you have a local backup, for example, on that one site, and you're going to set up a disaster recovery site, maybe it's a service provider, maybe it's a secondary office you have, and you want to have a backup appliance there where you can connect those two appliances or those two servers that can replicate between each other. We can literally copy the data store, put it on a NAS device or a portable NAS device, and jumpstart on the other side, where all you have to do is a resync, a differential resync. So you don't even have to go through the initial pain of copying data, which on a very low latency type of environment could take you years. Maybe not, but could be many days. So that's a great way of kind of avoiding the issue. But if you don't have a lot of bandwidth, you're going to be challenged at some point, if not for the backup, for the recovery. And if you're recovering at slow speeds, well, you have to be ready to handle that recovery time, and that may not be the best solution for you. You may have to have a local on-site strategy first, hoping that site is not affected to the point where you can recover from it.
George, do you have any advice for folks dealing with low bandwidth? Is it just a matter of sucking it up, or and investing in that on-premise? Yeah.
I mean, that's it's time to take a straw and suck it up, right? That's all. That's what you got. We all have those limitations, right? So it is what it is, right? Let me put it another way. We all have limitations we have to get around. So that's one of those situations where on-prem just works, right? You just might not have a choice because it's just going to take too long. Now that said, it's 2017, right? I mean, if you're a shop, and I know you might have a small shop, I get it, but if you've got low bandwidth, find another job. Like this place where you work sucks, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. If they're not willing to invest in their bandwidth, if they can't invest in their bandwidth, which is only good for their business, how can they possibly be investing in you? It's time to go, right? I mean, at that point in time, you just gotta make a personal decision. But that said, if you're handcuffed to that for whatever reason, on-prem is literally on-prem is the only way to go. But I remember what I said before, right? Anything you buy has to have a hook to the future. It's gotta. So whatever you buy that's on-prem has got to get you to the cloud at some point. It's got to get you to something, whatever the next level is. It's got to have that in. It's got to have it baked in. It's got to give you a really simple and easy upgrade pack to that, but it's got to have it. You can't invest in something for on-prem that's where it begins and it ends, because then you might as well just go to Home Depot and buy bricks, because that's what you have, right? What you need to do is make sure that you bring in software that works on-prem for now and gives you those hooks to the future. It has to.
All right. Let's take one last question before we go. George, we'll start with you. This is from Percussive Maintenance. Money is always an issue. Should our focus be towards data protection or standard backup? my question is, what's the main difference between the two? Is backup not sort of a subset of data protection?
That's when you grow up in a Latin household, that's the answer you get when no one wants to tell you no. It's not the same thing. Christoph might have a different opinion, but Christoph might have a different definition or more expansive definition. They're not the same thing, right? So backup is data protection. Theoretically, is it's a form of backup, but I wouldn't call it backup, right? Snapshots, replication, that's data protection, right? That's essentially data protection. Backup is actually a secured, protected copy of your data that can be restored quickly, right? It's those are not, they sound like the same thing. It's not the same thing, right? Typically your backup is in not only a different location, but on a different completely different, right? It's not related to your primary. It's just a copy of the data that can be restored. It's completely protected. I can't kind of explain that maybe enough, right? So that said, if your budget is tight, I'm going the direction of backup. You're going to be able to protect more data for a lower cost and restore it quicker. Right. So I would go, if you have to choose between one or the other, which is in some ways to me is absurd, right? Because especially the world we live in today, you should be able to do at least snapshots plus backups. Mm-hmm. So that would be both. But let's assume for whatever reason you can't, right? Your storage is so old, you have to crank it. Like you walk in with the little thing and you crank it and you turn it like this. It's got the little wheel and you just got to do your thumb and just turn it. Okay, now we have it. Let's assume that's the world you live in, right? Your servers just, you got to walk into your servers and the servers come up, right? So if that's the world you live in, I opt for backup 100%, right? Because again, like I said, there's a cost factor, there's a restoration factor, and backup is just going to satisfy that at much greater depth. And you could also, like both Christoph and I have said, tape isn't dead, right? You can back up to tape, you can get great compression, you get great speeds, and it's very cost effective. So that would be the direction I would go. But realistically speaking, it's rare that you don't at least have snapshots. And so you work with like ArcServe, for example, where you can have your snapshots and then they can take those snapshots and back them up for you. So you get both at a reasonable cost and you're all around protected, right? When cost is a factor, I think that should be affordable for pretty much everybody. It's rare circumstances where that's not at least an option for you, right? If it isn't for whatever reason, you have to figure out what type of local backup strategy you can employ, right? But you have to have it. You could probably go to eBay. You could find a DeLorean somewhere that takes you back 15 years and back up like with a SCSI attached drive. There's got to be a DeLorean out there that does that.
All right, Christoph, any advice from you as far as data protection versus backup on a limited budget?
Yeah, I don't, we don't want to make this like some sort of academic thing, but I think if you look at the way we've named our product, I think it says it all, right? It's our portfolio is now called ArcServe Unified Data Protection, and it's really the unification under one console, a single pane of glass of multiple data protection or data replication or protection techniques from, again, block level. We also have some archiving now. We have a direct to cloud. So ultimately, backup to the earlier point, a backup is a point in time of data. Okay, so it's kind of like history stuck in time, but it's also the process of saving that data at a point in time. That's all that it is. And really, again, I agree with the statement George made earlier, which is it's not about backup, it's about recovery. That's the only thing that matters. So ultimately, does it really matter whether you're doing a block level incremental or you're taking a snapshot that's software based or you're mounting a snapshot that's hardware based, which is one of the use cases we just discussed? Because, by the way, we love those snapshots on storage systems. They go fast, they're non-disruptive, or very, 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 there's very little disruption, if at all, to the application that's hitting that storage system, and we can leverage it. That's beautiful. So there are many different techniques, and that's really what data protection is. And I think some people add to this now. Protecting data is also, the cybersecurity piece of it. So I've heard that one as well. So we tend to be more focused on, okay, it's really about continuous data protection, continuous replication, maybe a little bit of high availability, traditional backup, block level incremental. These are the type of subcategories you might find in data protection. And I would agree, don't make that choice of just doing backups, just focus on what your needs are. Your needs are recovery-based and not backup-based.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again for everyone. It's time to start wrapping up the show. It is time to announce the winner of our prize. So without further ado, the winner of the Nintendo Switch is going to go to Marek Loyuski, aka Marek. Congratulations, you are the winner of our Nintendo Switch. Big thanks again to our sponsors, ArcServe and HPE. As always, Christoph and George, you guys were awesome. Love having you on. Can't wait to do this next time. Until then, y'all make sure to check out all the other cool events that we got coming up. And by sticking around and seeing all the other events in our online events calendar. Until next time, though, y'all stay safe, keep it spicy, and we'll see you guys back here next time. So long, guys.
Goodbye.
Take care.
Bye now.